Hello everyone, welcome to my penultimate Star Wars book review video. This is the second to last one that I'll be doing. Seems to be wrapping up pretty neatly with Rise of Skywalker coming out next month, and then I'll be officially wrapped up with my Star Wars book reviews. But as I said, it'll be the last regular review next month. I still want to do the Young Jedi Knight series. I might do that at some point. And I've actually been getting into some of the older comics. I've been rereading Crimson Empire, and I might want to review that at some point, but God, I haven't read that probably since it first came out. But it's the regular monthly reviews are going to stop after December, and we'll be done with that. So enjoy them while you can, because we're getting close to the end. But I think, this is the 40th video I've done, and one more next month will make 41. I've done a nice chunk of Star Wars media outside of the movies. I think I've done a lot of material there, reviewed a lot of books, especially when you consider many of the videos cover more than one book. So it's I put a lot into this. But before I get into the books that I'll be covering in today's video, I want to talk a little bit more about the Rise of Skywalker. We're a few weeks away from the official premiere, and I've got to say, if I haven't made it clear up to this point, I think this movie is going to be a disaster, and I don't want it to be a disaster. I don't want this new trilogy to end on a really sour note, but everything I've seen and everything I've been hearing is just like, oh no, oh no, oh no. And it started when I heard that laugh, the Emperor's laugh in the first teaser trailer, and I was like, oh shit, they don't know what they're doing. And, I mean, nobody, even the staunchest defenders of the sequel trilogy, you cannot tell me that Emperor Palpatine returning was the plan all along. And there's no way it was. There's absolutely no way it was. I think there's a possibility that J.J. Abrams had a loose outline of what he wanted the overall story to be, and then Rian Johnson came on board and got carte blanche to do whatever the fuck he wanted. Why Disney gave him that, I don't know. But Disney and Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy and all that, why they allowed him to do whatever he wanted and just blow everything up and, kill so much and end so much and have poor reveals for everything, or non-reveals for everything that JJ had set up. Why he would be allowed to do that, I don't know. And it's really kind of painted them into a box in part 9, and here we are. Moves like bringing back Lando and the Emperor just reek of desperation. And I haven't read any of the leaks, the supposed leaks, and that have been coming out lately, but I have heard about people walking out of the test screenings, which that's not a good sign. And reshoots are still happening, supposedly. Apparently the film's not even done yet. And I look at that and I go, oh my goodness, this is not good. This is not good. Maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know. But really, I think when this is all said and done, and better men than me have talked ad nauseum about all of this and what exactly went wrong with the Star Wars sequels. But I think to simplify it, what it really comes down to, I think Disney and more Disney probably than Lucasfilm, but I think Disney saw that they had this brand, and they just thought that it doesn't matter what we do with it, it's going to make money. So they were just kind of like, fine, it'll be great. Just don't make it like the prequels and we'll be good. And I think Lucasfilm, number one, wanted to go against the prequels, but I think that was kind of like all that they had on their mind. There's been talk about, Raise a Mary Sue and forced progressivism and all that other stuff. And I'm sure that played into some of it as well. But it's almost like nobody involved thought, hey, let's have a good story mapped out. Because you start with Force Awakens, which is, basically just A New Hope again. And that was a criticism that everybody had. I have that criticism of the movie. But I also kind of let it slide. It's like, all right, maybe they felt like they needed to win some people back after the prequels. It's like, let's see where they go after this. Then Last Jedi happened, and it was like, uh-oh. For a lot of people went like, uh-oh, fuck this. And I was kind of like, I didn't know how to react to it initially. I was like, this is odd, right? This is weird. And it's like, but I was like, okay, let's see where they go with it in part 9. And now I see where they're going with it. And I'm like, oh, so you're just ripping off Dark Empire now, basically, is what it sounds like. I mean, if the Emperor is coming back in this thing, it's like, okay, so you're basically just ripping off Dark Empire, and it's like, all right, I don't even care. Like Dark Empire, one of these heralded, highly celebrated entries of Star Wars media in the world of comics. I wasn't that high on it. If you go back and watch my review of it, I was not that high on Dark Empire. So any kind of movie that's done to kind of emulate Dark Empire, I'm not happy with. I'm like, okay. Especially after everything that they've already done leading up to this. It's like, this was not the plan. This clearly was not the plan. So they just said, pulled a whole fuck it move in there in damage control, and they're just trying everything they can to put something on the screen, it sounds like. And really, what it goes back to, and it's easy to play armchair quarterback and Captain Hindsight and all that stuff, but really what it goes back to is I don't think, maybe JJ had a plan initially, I don't know, but he wasn't going to be directing all 3 films anyway, initially. He wasn't supposed to direct Part 9 until all the shit hit the fan, but they just didn't have a plan, and I think that's becoming more and more obvious by the day. They did not have a full outline of a story for 7, 8, and 9 mapped out. And say what you will about the prequels, and Lord knows I've said plenty, and as I've said, better men than me have said plenty. At least all the films feel like they belong together, and they build off on top of each other, and they feel like they're all part of like their own self-contained story, and they all belong together. I can sit here and bash it to death easily, as most people have done, but at least they all feel like they belong together. 7, 8, and 9 is going to be the weirdest goddamn trilogy to watch back to back to back, because it makes no sense that the Emperor's back. I have no idea what the conflict even is at this point. It just boiled down to the rebellion and the Empire again, which feels like a rehash, and it's like, and I'm not a creative writer by any stretch of the imagination. If you'd given me, like, any kind of control over this new trilogy, I guarantee you on day one I would have walked in with the entire New Jedi Order series, all 19 books, and would have just thrown them down on the table and said, all right, guys, we're adapting this. We got to shorten this down into 3 movies. Let's do it. And, oh, by the way, the Thrawn Trilogy is canon in my mind. And that's how I would have operated. I would have even considered it's like, why make episode 7? Just jump to 10. Like, do what the original film did by starting with 4. Just jump straight to 10. And it's like, well, what are episode 7, 8, 9? I'm like, the Thrawn Trilogy, duh. I would have acted as if the Thrawn Trilogy was still canon, because I'm that much of a fanboy for it. But it's, my ideas are just very hacky. It's just, hey, let's just take these books and adapt the books. Let's see how that goes and see if we can make that work. And very uncreative, very lazy, but at the very least, it's material that you have at your disposal. And that made me mad. Kathleen Kennedy said in a recent interview, it's like, well, Star Wars is hard to make because there's no source material. I'm like, what? What have I been doing on this channel for the last few years? Like, my God, man. It's, what do you mean there's no source material? You've got more books to work with than I know what to do with. It's like, Jesus, this is my 40th video reviewing books, and I've barely scratched the surface of how much material there is to cover. You could have done anything you wanted. When I heard they were doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi show, the first thing out of my mouth was, take the Kenobi book and adapt that. You're welcome. That's all you have to do. Just stick to that book and you'll be fine. I mean, it's just a mess right now. It's just a mess, and it's sad to see Star Wars kind of turn into this. And I hope the movie's good. I don't want it to be bad, but it ain't looking good. I'll say that. Now, one thing that does seem at least solid and seem right up my alley is The Mandalorian. I have not watched it yet because I'm not signing up for Disney Plus just for one show that I can't binge right away. Because I looked at it, it's like, okay, it's 13 episodes, I think. The Mandalorian's 13 episodes. They're up to episode 4, and they're airing 1 episode a week. I'm like, I'm not paying for Disney Plus for 3 months or 4 months just to get all 13 episodes of The Mandalorian. I will wait until the entire show drops, then I will binge it, and then I'll decide whether or not I want to keep Disney Plus. But I'm not going to keep it for 4 months just so I can watch a 13-episode series. I'm like, that ain't happening. I would much rather just binge the whole thing. It's like, come on, Netflix has set this up. Netflix set the standard here, guys. Come on. But in any case, I am excited to see The Mandalorian. I know all about I've seen pictures of Baby Yoda, and I've seen people go nuts over Baby Yoda, but I have no idea what the context of Baby Yoda is. So I'm looking forward to eventually watching it, but like I said, I'm going to wait until the entire show drops before I sit down and actually watch the whole thing. So, but everything I'm hearing is positive. Somebody described it to me as, Patrick, it's exactly what you wanted. What do you mean by that? It's basically a Clint Eastwood spaghetti western, but with Star Wars shit. And I'm like, that's what I always wanted a Boba Fett movie to be, so I think we're good. I'm completely okay with that. So it's so at least I have that to look forward to. But in the world of movies, I think Star Wars needs to take a break after Rise of Skywalker. Just whatever you're gonna do, just do it. It's probably gonna blow up in everybody's faces, and it's probably gonna be terrible. But just do it, and then give Star Wars a break in movies for at least a decade. Give it at least a decade-long break, and then return to it to see if you can fix it. See if you have like an interesting story. And my God, going back to the whole like they didn't have a plan thing, the fact that they were doing regular series episodes and doing offshoot movies at the same time, it's like, guys, this ain't Marvel. Don't do that. Don't do that. Star Wars needs to be an event movie. And you do a movie every year, and I mean, when they did the Solo movie, they released that immediately after The Last Jedi. I was like, the fuck are you doing? We just had one of these, and people didn't react too well to that movie. I wouldn't release Solo just like immediately after The Last Jedi shitstorm, and turns out didn't do well at the box office, and for a ton of other reasons, mostly because I think a lot of people assume, who the fuck wants to see a Han Solo movie? I wouldn't mind a Han Solo movie. My whole thing is, look, if you're going to do offshoot stories, or if you're going to do... You got to do either offshoot stories or regular episodes. Don't do both. This ain't Marvel. This ain't a comic book. You've got to, Star Wars needs to be event movies. And trying to tackle all of that and do so much in such a little time span, that's not going to work for Star Wars. And sure enough, here we are. Episode 7 came out. I was super excited for it. Cautiously optimistic, I would describe myself, but I was still excited to see it. And here we are, episode 9's coming out, and it's like, I don't really care. I don't really give a shit. Not that I love Star Wars any less. I just bought some Christmas ornaments for my tree, and I got a Darth Vader and a Yoda, and I got a Yoda tree topper that's coming in the mail in a couple days. So it's I still love the brand. I'm still doing these videos, for the next month or so anyway, but I still love reading Star Wars and to experience Star Wars. I heard the new video game that just came out was actually really good, like the best Star Wars game to come out in years, and I'm like, that's great, that's awesome. It's nice to know there's good stuff coming out. But in the world of movies, I feel like Disney dropped the ball, and all it stems from is that they didn't plan it, they didn't map it out, and it's a mess, and that's unfortunate. I don't want it to be a mess, but it's a mess. But we'll know more when Rise of Skywalker comes out. I'm going to see it, probably against my better judgment, because I think I know I'm going to get mad at this movie. And I'm going to be sitting there... Well, okay, here's the thing. Because I do love the Emperor as a character, I'm going to be sitting there the entire time like, this is so stupid that he's in this movie. But he's probably... And Red Letter Media said this, Rich Evans specifically, and I'm like, he might be right on the money. It's completely stupid that he's back, but he's probably going to be the best thing in the movie. I'm like, that's so sad if that's true, but he's probably right. I mean, he was the best thing in the prequels, so whatever. But yeah, that wraps up the Rise of Skywalker talk. We'll know more when the movie comes out, but I'm not looking forward to it. Nope. Now that we've got that misery out of the way, let's go into today's books that I'll be reviewing. Now, if you saw my video back in September, you saw that I did a special video looking at the works of Timothy Zahn and some of the various Star Wars books that he's written. Timothy Zahn was the author of the Thrawn Trilogy, my personal favorite Star Wars books ever written, and by extension that makes him my favorite Star Wars author of all time. But he did more than just the Thrawn Trilogy. He did many, many, many other books, especially in the expanded universe, and he's even adding to the new Disney canon now, as we'll cover in today's video. But it turns out that he had so many books that I've enjoyed and experienced and read that trying to do a tribute to him in one video wasn't enough. I had to split it into two, and that's to say nothing for his previous works that I'd already reviewed, like the Thrawn Trilogy, like the first Thrawn book of the Disney canon, and the Hand of Thrawn duology. Timothy Zahn has added a lot to the Star Wars mythos, and really was the driving force through the Thrawn Trilogy, was really the driving force of keeping us Star Wars fans happy before the prequels came about. Like, there was a long gap in between Return of the Jedi and Episode 1, and in that time we got more Star Wars material through books and video games and comics and things like that, and Timothy Zahn added a lot to that and contributed a great deal, and I'm a big fan of his work, and I wanted to pay tribute to him specifically, but he's done so many books that I really enjoyed that I had to split it into 2 separate videos. And we're going to start off today by looking at something that I've already reviewed. In a sense, I've already reviewed this. This is the comic book adaptation of the Thrawn Trilogy. I got this while at AwesomeCon, where I met Timothy Zahn for a second time. He actually signed this copy of it. He had these for sale at a stand, and I was like, oh, I can get a trade paperback edition of the entire Thrawn Trilogy in comic book form. I never read the comic book version before, so this should be a lot of fun. You see right there in the back, the Thrawn Trilogy is here. Boom. And yeah, this is great. So this is the, what is this, the 4th or 5th time I've bought the Thrawn Trilogy in my lifetime, because I bought it when I was a kid. I bought it again a few years ago when I moved to my new place and I wanted to build up my Star Wars book collection again. I bought the audiobooks through audible.com. Great site, great program. And now I've bought this comic adaptation. So that's 4. That's 4. I bought this trilogy 4 fucking times in my lifetime. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Thrawn Trilogy. So any new way I can experience it, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this because it's basically just the Thrawn Trilogy in comic book form. So if you've read the novels, there's nothing to really, nothing new, no significant changes or anything like that. It's just a visualized version of the Thrawn Trilogy. And I'm looking for, where is it? I'm specifically looking for Thrawn. It's like, it's amazing. I've been flipping through this book and I can't find a good, here we go. All right. You'll see, this is what the artwork looks like. You see, that's Joruus C'baoth right there. You can see Thrawn. And, yeah, real good stuff. And you actually also get that little vision of Luke and Mara Jade there, so that's also great. So the artwork is actually really good. And again, this is just a really cool way to re-experience the story that I'd already experienced various otherwise. The audiobook is really good. The actual novels are really good. And it turns out the comic is worth reading too. But like I said, if you've already read the books, this isn't going to necessarily give you any new information or any kind of new insight. It's basically just the Thrawn Trilogy, but told through the medium of comics. And if that interests you, go check it out. If it doesn't interest you and you just want to stick with the books, that's fine too. It's not a must-read per se, but if you've never read the Thrawn Trilogy, I would recommend getting the books first, because that's the best way to experience it, I would say. But as a new way to experience the stories that I've seen before, it's pretty good, and I'm glad I read it. I had never read it before, which is kind of amazing. You think I would have when I was younger, but it's really good, and it's the Thrawn Trilogy, so you can't go wrong. Now, building off of the Thrawn Trilogy, you may remember from that story the details of Joruus C'baoth's backstory, in that he was a Jedi Master that was killed on the Outbound Flight project. Now, I guess the Outbound Flight project has kind of become, to the Thrawn Trilogy, what the Clone Wars throwaway line was to the original trilogy, where it was kind of this throwaway line that was expository and just used to explain who or what something is, and just provide a little additional context to the universe that was being presented. And it sort of like started all this like fan speculation stuff about what it was and what was going on and what all the circumstances were surrounding that event. So I guess it stands to reason that sooner or later we were going to get this book, Outbound Flight, part of the Expanded Universe canon, written by Timothy Zahn. And that is a nice picture of the Outbound Flight. There's also this nice little diagram of it in the book itself. So that's nice. But the Outbound Flight, it's a novel, a story that takes place before the events of the Clone Wars, shortly after Phantom Menace, I believe, like within like a few years, because Anakin's a little older at this point. But basically, in a weird way, this is kind of the Thrawn Trilogy's version of the Phantom Menace. Not in terms of quality, it's obviously much better than the Phantom Menace, but it is that prequel story to kind of give a little bit of additional context to what was being used to explain events that were happening in the Thrawn Trilogy that never really needed to be explained. I just kind of got it. It's like, okay, Jorah Sabaoth, Jedi Master that got killed on the Outbound Flight. Got it. I don't really need much more than that. But if you want to, expanded universe is the perfect place to do stuff like this too. But if you want to have an expansion on those ideas and learn about what that story is, this book has got you covered. And you'll notice on the back here, there's a certain character that is featured in the story as well. So this book, as far as I know, it represents Thrawn's earliest entry into the Star Wars story. Now, you wouldn't expect Thrawn. I actually didn't know Thrawn was even in this book when I picked it up. I was just looking for something written by Timothy Zahn to review as part of the series. So, and I had never read this book before, so I thought, oh, okay, cool. I'll look into this. And then I saw this guy right here on the back, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like this. I think this book is gonna have me covered. But typically, if Timothy Zahn writes something and it has Thrawn and or Mara Jade in it, I'm gonna be happy. And yeah, this was that for sure. So what exactly happens in this story? Well, Jorah Sabaoth, the Jedi Master, is trying to get funding for the Outbound Flight project, which, if you'll notice in the diagrams and the pictures that I showed, it's basically like 6 dreadnought ships that are tied together, and they're going forth past the boundaries of the known galaxy and going into the unknown regions to explore it and gain knowledge and expand the power of the Republic and all that other stuff. And Palpatine, who is Supreme Chancellor at this point, is wary about giving him funding and sends him on a mission to settle this mining dispute where Jorah Sabaoth ultimately succeeds in settling the dispute and ultimately gets his wish, which leads to the Outbound Flight project being launched with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker along for the ride, at least initially. But behind the scenes, you've got Darth Sidious, who, as we know, is Palpatine, pulling strings and trying to prevent the Outbound Flight from reaching its destination because he fears it will provoke an alien empire that he's already aware of, that he wants to build the Republic, transform into the Empire, strong enough to face. And also along the way is a commander of the Chiss Ascendancy, part of that military force in the unknown regions, someone by the name of, not Grand Admiral Thrawn at this point, but Mithron Naruto. I probably butchered the pronunciation there, but yes, Thrawn crosses paths with the Outbound Flight as well, and Jorah Sabaoth is going off on this, this exploration mission, not aware of the dangers that await him. So, yeah, a lot of interesting things in play here. And again, this is a fun exploration for some of the characters. I already mentioned Darth Sidious, who is really great in this. I mean, I love the Emperor. I do love the Emperor. I hate that he's in Episode 9, but I love the Emperor. And I really, this is one of the better uses of him as a puppet master, because he starts playing all the different sides against each other. And he uses agents that he has within the Republic to spy on Jorah Sabaoth and try to sabotage the Outbound Flight. When that doesn't work, he gets into contact with Thrawn and uses Thrawn to intercept the Outbound Flight and get them to stop. And Thrawn is aware of this alien empire, which, let's be honest, it has to be the Yuuzhan Vong. There's no other explanation for what it could be. And that builds into the idea that the Empire was built the way it was, not only to keep the citizens of the galaxy under control and to have that strong authoritarian order, but to also prepare for the threat of this looming alien invasion that was sure to come and the Emperor knew was coming. So by the time you get to the new Jedi Order series, the Empire has fallen and the Republic is woefully unprepared for what's coming, which would have been a great concept for the sequel trilogy, would it not? I'm just saying, but anyway, what do I know? So the Outbound Flight, which is Jorah Sabaoth's little pet project, could be something that would trigger the invasion early before the Republic / Empire is anywhere near ready for such a thing. So Sidious is trying to play puppet master and do all of that. We also get Anakin and Obi-Wan thrown into the mix, and this was interesting. I mean, at first glance, it seems like fan service to have them there, because there's really, I mean, if you're doing a story about the Outbound Flight and ultimately how Jorah Sabaoth died, you don't really need Obi-Wan and Anakin there in a significant way, but there's a fun character moments there where, and I always speculated what the real Jorah Sabaoth was really like. Reading the Thrawn Trilogy, we obviously get to meet his clone, who is extremely unhinged and egocentric and crazed. And but that's obviously not the same character. It's not who the original man was. So I always wonder what the original Jedi Master was really like. It's like maybe he was a level-headed guy, someone like an Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then we meet him in this book, and it's like, oh no, he's an asshole. He is an egomaniac asshole. Guy's a dick, and he's like very cocky, very sure of himself, and doesn't like to be told when he's wrong, and he doesn't like it when he doesn't get his way. But he's sure that the Outbound Flight is the future, and it should be the most important thing and the highest priority in the Republic. And he's got a Padawan learner by the name of Lorana Jinsler. I want to make sure I've got that name right. Jinsler, yes. Lorana Jinsler, and she's more like soft-spoken and introspective and someone who's closer to what you would expect a typical Jedi to be. So when Obi-Wan and Anakin meet Jorah and Lorana, you kind of get the sense that Anakin would probably be a better match, at least as far as personality goes, with Jorah Sabaoth as his mentor, and Lorana would be a better match for someone like Obi-Wan. At least in terms of like temperament and personality, they're like two peas in a pod. But I'm the type of guy that believes opposites. You need like the opposites to really like bring out the best in somebody and help them like curb bad habits. Because if you got two peaceful people, low-key kind of people on the same team, maybe you don't have the call to action maybe isn't as strong when it should be. And if you have two hotheads like Anakin and Jorah on the same team, they might kill each other because they're just constantly button heads and neither one, and they're both so stubborn and neither one is willing to stand down. But initially it was fun to see those little meetings there where it really seemed like and like part of it seemed implied that Anakin's like, I wonder what it would have been like if I had Jorah Sabaoth as my Jedi Master, which is kind of funny, and it's fun that Zahn took the time to kind of play with that a little bit and explore that and give us a definitive character for this guy. Because like I said, in the Thrawn Trilogy, we just dealt with his clone, so we didn't really know what he was like. So to see him here, it's like, oh yeah, no, he's a dick. he's a total dick. But another major highlight here is obviously Thrawn, who we get to see in his earliest stages. As far as I know, his earliest stages in the expanded universe canon. And here we get to see him as a high-ranking officer in the Chiss Ascendancy. And he likes to learn, and he likes to grow his knowledge base and learn about this galaxy where the Outbound Flight is coming from. And he's able to, obviously he meets up with Darth Sidious at one point, but also there are these smugglers that cross paths with him very early in the story. And he learns from them and actually helps them out. When he could like keep him prisoner or kill them, he actually chooses to learn about them and uses them as sources of information on the galaxy about the Republic and everything else. So Thrawn he's a big picture guy, and he's always been that. That's the big difference between him and the Emperor, like, especially Vader, because Vader is kind of like blunt force trauma all the way. Just get it done now and squish him under our boot. Whereas Thrawn's like, we'll let them... And there was a line in Rebels, which I thought Thrawn was great in Rebels, where he said, let the rebels have their meager victory here. I think I've narrowed down where their base is. So I've narrowed down the locations of their base. So we can let them have their meager victory here, but I'm going to get them sooner than later. So it's nice to see that mindset kind of applied to Thrawn here as well, even at this early stage. We also get to meet his brother, which is an interesting little addition. Of course, everybody's got a family. Everybody comes from somewhere. So it's nice to see a few additional Chiss characters thrown in besides Thrawn and see how their society works and how their military operations day-to-day work. So that was also fun to see as well. So, yeah, The Outbound Flight, I think, is a really good book. Not an entirely necessary one, because as I said, information about the Outbound Flight in the Thrawn Trilogy was kind of throwaway expository material just to explain who Jorah Sabaoth is. But I felt like Zahn crafted a pretty nifty little story here that had fun with the characters. We got to find out about Jorah Sabaoth. We got to see a little bit more of Obi-Wan and Anakin without kind of the things that made the prequels not work to kind of weigh it down. So it's kind of like, it's always funny to me whenever I read stories based on the prequel time period, how like so much better everybody else is at writing the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin than Lucas was in the movies, but it was fun to see that as well. And it's also a blast to see Darth Sidious like playing people against each other, and again playing Puppet Master, which is also a nice little thing as well. And things that he probably didn't really need to put in. Even the little teasers of the Vong invasion that's coming decades down the road. It's all fun, and it feels like a perfect fit for something like the expanded universe. And it even goes to show that the expanded universe wasn't only a platform to expand on what you see in the movies. They could even expand on the stuff that you see in the books that expanded on the movies. I think I've got that right. But anyway, Outbound Flight, I think it's a really good read. And if you're a fan of the original canon, the Legends canon as it's known as now, expanded universe is what I'll always call it, I think it's definitely worth picking up. And finally, we're going to close up today with 2 entries into the Disney canon, both written by Timothy Zahn. These are continuations of his original Thrawn book that was written for the Disney canon, which I reviewed on a previous video, the same video where I reviewed the Thrawn Trilogy, so go check that out if you have not checked it out already. But these 2 sequel books, Thrawn Alliances and Thrawn Treason, will be the final books I cover today, both written by Timothy Zahn, obviously, and quite clearly, both books are centered on Thrawn. So you got a nice little second Thrawn trilogy, I guess, basically about Thrawn's, experiences and times and his loyalty to the Empire and all the questions that brings up, especially with the Emperor and Darth Vader. So the thing that really struck me about Thrawn Alliances, I'm going to start with that one first, is that right off the bat, look at the cover. It's Grand Admiral Thrawn and Darth Vader, and this book delivered exactly what it promised in that it gave us interactions between Thrawn and Vader. Their interactions prior to this were rare, if at all. It wasn't a very common occurrence to have Thrawn and Vader interacting with each other. So to get an entire book centered around that, those 2 paired up, I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm all in on that. Sign me up. Shut up and take my money. Where do I sign up to get that thing? But the book did do something I didn't expect, and that was that it went back and forth between the past and the present, where we learn that, and this was explained in the first Thrawn book, of the new canon, I should say, where Thrawn had worked with Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars before. So we get that story, and how it ties into his modern-day escapades in dealing with Darth Vader on a specific mission that the Emperor has sent them both on. And it jumps back and forth in the timeline, and normally that can get a little confusing, but I was okay with it here because the events of the past played into what was going on in the present, and you also get to see Thrawn form a partnership with Anakin during the time of the Clone Wars, and then see how those actions impacted the modern-day events now that Thrawn is working with Darth Vader. And so I was a little surprised that they went that route with it, but it ended up being very interesting, and I ended up really liking it. And the major strength of this book are the interactions between Thrawn and Anakin and Thrawn and Vader. It basically played out exactly how I would have expected it to. When I first heard this book was being made, I thought, man, Thrawn is like Sherlock Holmes and Darth Vader is kind of like a Batman type, where they're both very smart individuals, but maybe they have different methods of going about things. Sherlock is kind of the, deductive reasoning type, and Vader is the fist that'll beat answers out of you if he has to, if he even wants answers. So it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes teamed up with Batman if both of them were evil fascists that were flying around in space. And so when I heard that this book was being done, I was very excited about it. And the thing I wanted most out of the book, I definitely got. I thought the conversations and the interactions between Vader and Thrawn were very well written. And, again, it's Timothy Zahn writing it. So it was clearly written by somebody who's had experience writing for this universe and for Star Wars. And it was almost like he'd had this idea for a long time and finally got to do it. Kind of had that vibe to it. Now, what is the story being told here exactly? Well, as I said, it jumps back and forth between the past and the present, so doing it like a plot summary is a little odd, but basically the Emperor senses a disturbance in the Force. and he assigns basically his two most capable underlings, Darth Vader and Grand Admiral Thrawn, to go investigate. And it turns out that this disturbance of the Force is happening on a planet, Batu, I believe the planet is called, where Thrawn and Anakin had their earlier mission in the Clone Wars. So we were getting like the backstory of that earlier mission, which was a mission to save Padme Amidala, where Anakin is trying to keep all of his personal things secret from Thrawn, even though Thrawn's very smart and starts to deduce things all on his own. Their mission was to save Padme Amidala, and they ultimately uncovered that members of the separatist movement were producing clone armor. Why would they be producing clone armor? Well, Darth Sidious was controlling both factions, was playing them against each other, is ultimately what the answer is. But, Thrawn suspected something more of that, and Anakin didn't. He was just like, nope, I followed orders, I could accomplish my mission, that is that. But that mission's success also led to that planet's infrastructure being completely destroyed, because the factories that were the source of income for all the citizens on the planet was now lost and gone forever because they destroyed the factories. So what was left in its place? Well, we find out when Thrawn and Vader go investigate this disturbance in the Force that the Emperor has sensed. And it turns out there's this new alien threat from the unknown region known as the Grisk, who I believe is probably a reference to the Yuuzhan Vong, but they probably couldn't use the Vong because of some mandate from Disney or something like that, so Timothy Zahn just called it something else. But basically they're this outsider alien threat that is finally starting to encroach on Empire space, and basically serving the same function that I talked about in Outbound Flight, where the Yuuzhan Vong was like this looming threat that the Emperor knew he was going to have to deal with at some point. The Grisk are now kind of serving that role here in this story, and actually both stories that I'm about to talk about. And it turns out the Grisk has kidnapped Chiss Force-sensitive children, which calls a lot of situations into play where Grand Admiral Thrawn, who is loyal to his race and to his people, wants to save the children, and Vader, you can imagine, Force-sensitive children, probably wants to murder them with his bare hands. So all those disagreements come into play, and there are calls to Grand Admiral Thrawn's loyalty is called into question. I should also note that these stories both take place during the events of Rebels, where Thrawn is obviously a very active part of those stories. And a very interesting thing, there are actually disagreements between Thrawn's desired project, which is the TIE Defender project, which is this new special kind of TIE fighter that is really good and the best TIE fighters ever made, and Thrawn wants to produce more of those. Whereas Project Stardust, those of you who watched Rogue One know that is the Death Star project, and there are those within the Empire who feel like the Death Star project is a waste of time and resources. Yes, it's a powerful weapon, but it's a waste of time and resources and manpower and everything else. And Thrawn feels like the TIE Defenders would be a more efficient way for the Empire to expand its power. And that disagreement comes into play. It's very similar to what I talked about in Outbound Flight between Jorah Sabaoth and the Republic and trying to get his project approved. So I don't know. I find it interesting whenever like those internal struggles and kind of internal politics like come into play, and you've got disagreements within the factions about what's the right course of action. And you saw that in the original film with Darth Vader and his disagreements with those on the little council table. That whole scene. It's one of the most famous scenes in the original movie, and it's great. And I like that kind of stuff. So it's obviously, this is the second book in a row I've talked about where he's done this, so obviously Zahn likes doing it too. And, but yeah, so overall, it's a really good book. I wouldn't call it one of the better, well, it's one of the better ones out of the Disney canon, but it's not like among Zahn's like best work. But as far as giving me what I wanted, which was Grand Admiral Thrawn interacting with Darth Vader, it was great. And we get to see them do everything together. We get to see them have arguments. We get to see them have discussions and formulate plans together. We get to see them get into a bar fight, which is fantastic. The mental picture in my head is just great. Just imagine like Grand Admiral Thrawn and Darth Vader going to a cantina and just trying to investigate whatever the hell is going on. And all of that is just delightful. And really, it just goes to show that, you don't need necessarily the most complicated story in the world to get people invested. You just need two great characters bouncing off of each other. And this book is just, if you love Darth Vader and you love Grand Admiral Thrawn and the idea of putting those two together interests you, by all means pick this book up. I think it's really, really good and absolutely delivers what it promises. And like I said, I actually liked, more than I thought I would, I actually liked the jumping back and forth between the past and the present, because you get to see how their earlier mission actually impacted what is going on in the present day, and how that kind of enforces their thoughts and beliefs in the present day as well. So a lot of good stuff going on here, and I think it's one of the stronger entries in the Disney canon. And again, it's two characters I love that interact the whole time. What's not to love about that? And finally, we're going to wrap up today with Thrawn Treason. I guess you could say part 3 of the new Disney canon Thrawn Trilogy. And I gotta admit, this one I was a little disappointed with. Again, look at the cover, and I'm like, okay, so is this going to be the Emperor and Grand Admiral Thrawn like interacting the whole time? That'd be great. Sadly, that is not the case. Their interactions are very, very minimal in this book, which is kind of a disappointment. I was kind of hoping we'd get to see more like them bouncing off of each other, much like what we got in Thrawn Alliances. But here, it's more about Thrawn's loyalties being brought into question, who he's truly loyal to, the Chiss or the Empire, which has been, the seeds have been laid for that ever since the first Thrawn book. So really what happens here, the disagreements over which is more efficient, the TIE Defenders or the Death Star, which one is more efficient for expanding the Empire's power, and which one deserves the Emperor's notice and recommendations and allocation of resources. That disagreement comes back into play. We see other Grand Admirals brought in and their 2 cents thrown in. And meanwhile, the Grisk becomes an increasing threat around the Empire's borders and the unknown regions. And we also see the return of Eli Vanto, who was Thrawn's best buddy, is second in the original Thrawn book. So it's nice to see him finally return. He is now part of the Chiss Ascendancy, I guess you would call it, and helping them out as on Thrawn's orders. And we also see what I believe to be the first use of Commander Pelion, who is basically the Watson to Grand Admiral Thrawn's Sherlock Holmes in the original Thrawn trilogy. And he ended up becoming one of my favorite characters in the expanded universe, especially when you get into the new Jedi Order series. I think he's great character. So it was nice to see him come back in this, especially in a Thrawn book. It's like Thrawn without Pelion. It's like Watson. It's like Holmes without Watson. You can't have it. So it was really great to see him come back. And we also learned that, while Thrawn's loyalties are being brought into question, it turns out that the other Grand Admiral is actually the one who's trying to fudge his loyalties to the Empire to get what he wants out of it, and cause some internal strife in the Empire to get what he wants. So a lot of different people's loyalties are brought into question, from Thrawn to this other Grand Admiral to Eli Vanto and everybody else. And where does the Chiss fall in all of this? Where does the Grisk fall in all of this? And is the Emperor puppet mastering everything, or is Thrawn puppet mastering everything? What exactly is going on? And the book is, I feel like this book juggled maybe a little too much. Maybe it splits its focus a little too much among the different characters. And maybe it tries a little too hard to fit within the continuity of the Rebels TV show and the previous 2 Thrawn books and everything else. So maybe a little too complicated. It's actually a shorter book. I think it's a shorter book than Alliances, yet it felt longer because there was just so many different things going on, and the story was being split into too many different pathways that it was easy to lose sight of Thrawn being the major focus of the book. And again, I would have preferred a more simple approach, much like the second book was, where it was Thrawn and Vader most of the time interacting, and that was enough to carry the story. I would have liked to have seen the Emperor looming over Thrawn's shoulders the entire time, and them having more interactions together. I think that would have made for a lot more interesting of a story. Granted, the Emperor's the type of guy that likes to be left alone so he can go sit in his throne and stare off into space, while everything else around him is being built and all that stuff. But you know, I mean, there have been books before where the Emperor takes a more active role in the story, and in Clone Wars he took a more active role, and Revenge of the Sith, obviously, he took a more active role. So I think there was room to do something like that between Thrawn and the Emperor as well. I would have enjoyed it, if nothing else. But as is, I think it's an okay book, not one of Zahn's better efforts, and it doesn't quite live up to the previous 2 Thrawn books that he had done. But still an okay read and still solid, and if you like Thrawn, it's probably worth a watch just to experience more material for that character. Me personally, I can't get enough of Thrawn, so anything with that name on it, it's at least going to get my attention and make me want to watch it, or want to read it, I should say. But that is that. Now that we've had 3 Thrawn books, one can hope that, fingers crossed, at some point, because there's a huge gap between episodes 6 and 7 that hasn't been addressed in this new canon. Maybe one day we'll get Mara Jade to return in book form, and maybe Timothy Zahn will pen the story. That would be cool to see. I would really appreciate to have Mara Jade back. So here's hoping that happens. But that concludes my book reviews for this video. Thanks again, everybody, for listening and watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, comment down below, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos. We're at the home stretch here with the Star Wars books. Like I said, my next one's going to be the final regular video. It won't be the final one for good, I don't think, but it'll be the final regular one. We'll conclude the series at 41, which is not a nice even number, but again, it's a sign that's like I've done a lot of these. So, you know, but it's been fun, and I've really enjoyed going back and rereading some of these old books, and also experiencing new ones for the first time. It's been a very fun experiment on my part. But like I said, I am done for now. That is all I've got for you guys. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and I will see you all later.